So what I'm hearing you say is UAS, more tech, healthcare, those kind of jobs to create some stability in our economy?
And value-added ag and value-added energy. I mean, we're shipping commodities out of the state, whether it's natural gas or oil. We have the ability to use those products here. I mean, we could be like Iceland. Iceland attracts people to come there because energy is free, because they have all this geothermal. I mean, we've got all this gas we're flaring off. I mean, we could be saying, come here because we've got free natural gas.
Mr. Becker, underneath a Becker administration, what would you do to obviously stabilize our economy, and what kind of industries would you go after to recruit to North Dakota?
Let me get back to one other point. When you talked about are we doom and gloom, are we exaggerating the state of the economy, I just want to point one thing out. We're currently 1.1 billion short. If we take the assumption that our revenues are going to be roughly the same next biennium, and at this point in time, that's what we have to do. And no one's really talking about the fact that we started this biennium with a $730 million beginning balance. Okay, next biennium is 0. So we're not looking at a 1.1 next biennium, we're looking at a 1.8 to 2. So it is serious. And the days of sticking your head in the sand should be over. Getting to your current question.
Can I interrupt
yes.
you? I think you bring up a great point. And yet, again, in Mr. Stenstrom's piece, he says, look, right now, our economy is estimated to be at $53 billion, second best in our state's history.
Second best means it's on decline.
All right, continue, sir.
Okay, the question comes into play about diversifying, and you know, if we had a business, we'd be looking at diversifying it. If the state was a business, the energy sector, they're looking at diversifying by getting into renewables. It's a smart thing to do. The question is, what's the role of the government in this diversification? You're saying, what industries would you go after? Well, you know, inherent in that question is, what special treatment are you going to give special industries that you've determined you want in your state? The role of the government shouldn't be to pick winners and losers. To diversify, the best thing we can do is to provide a better overall tax climate for anyone. And then the diversification happens naturally. Right now, we're 26th in the nation in our tax climate. We can clearly improve on that.
So how would you do that specifically?
We'll take a look at any regulations that are impeding business to come in, which you know, there are several. I don't have any major ones to point out for you now, but also the taxes. Our corporate tax rate, although we've dropped it these last 3 successive sessions, is still higher than average in the nation. If we look at the way we're dealing with property taxes, what I was going to get to is we're first in the nation for total tax revenue by the state per capita, first. And so you would think, with us being an alleged conservative state, that would mean that our other tax burdens are lower because the tax revenue is so high because of the oil revenue, right? But we're not. At best, we're middle of the pack for our sales tax rate, for our revenue per capita for property tax, revenue per capita for income tax, both individual and corporate. Corporate's actually quite high. So there's so much room to improve. People say, well, we brought it down so much already. We can do more.
But that's what I'm getting at, because you kind of put words in my mouth saying, hey, Chris, that means you're trying to go pick winners and losers as a government. I'm not suggesting that. I want to know from you, you're the one running for governor, what specifically would you do to entice businesses? Maybe that's lowering tax rates. I don't know what your answer is going to be, but what are you going to do to recruit a more diverse economy to the states so we're not dependent upon global commodity prices?
I'll throw it right back at you. What are we doing right now? We currently have in place a number of programs, incentives, tax credits, subsidies, deductions that are designed to increase our diversification. What do those in effect do? They lower the total tax rate, that they improve the total tax climate for specific industries. If that allegedly is going to bring them in, why wouldn't we do it for everyone? And that way we don't have to be the wise guy on the hill saying, well, this industry is best and that value addition is best. It's open for everyone. And instead of having the situation where Pfizer and the other groups are going to Ireland to base their headquarters for improved taxes, we are the Ireland.
Let me ask you this, because I think the micro and the macro can match up. You're saying, hey, Chris, we shouldn't be picking winners and losers. This gentleman here uses the Renaissance Zone quite nicely for downtown Fargo. Are you saying that we should get rid of all Renaissance Zones across the state as well?
I'd like to see the Renaissance Zone concept be strictly local. The locals should run that. Just as you mentioned earlier, it's close.
That's not being congruent with what you just said you would do as governor.
Well, congruent with governor is allowing the local municipalities to have as much control as possible. We're talking about state programs here as governor. If a local municipality, in fact in Bismarck, without entering any program whatsoever, if you want to do an addition on a building, you get an automatic 5-year exemption on the property taxes for the portion in which the value is increased. I mean, municipalities can do what they see fit for their community.
Okay.
So a Renaissance Zone in a statewide fashion, not only does it cause a bureaucracy to come into existence in the Department of Commerce, but we also look at the fact that besides local property taxes, it deals with income tax. So that means that all of the taxpayers in North Dakota are helping to pay for a subsidy that a specific business in a specific town. So yes, I don't like the idea of Renaissance Zone statewide. I do like the idea that the local municipalities can choose to do that if they want.
All right, we'll move on to that in a moment. I do want to move on to more energy-specific things, and let's start
Can
with...
I just say one
Yes,
thing on
sir.
that, which is I think there's two components that we're talking about here, and one is getting people to come to North Dakota or growing the businesses that we have here. We've got 20,000 firms in the state, and part of where the new businesses are going to emerge, they're going to emerge from places we can't predict. I mean, I agree with Rick on that. I mean, you can't try to predict the future, particularly with technology moving so quickly and the innovation that's occurring. Part of the reason why Fargo's economy has become unhinged more from the state economy is because of all the activity that's going on here. But things like Startup Weekend, Women's Startup Weekend, TEDx, Midwest Mobile Summit, Cultivate, I mean, all of the community building, Million Cups, all this stuff supports a community of entrepreneurship and innovation. So then if you have that stuff growing, there's two things. One is the tax climate, the other is where does the business locate? And if we create incentives as a state to get people to locate on the edge where we have to build them new infrastructure, we're raising the tax burden for everyone. If we create incentives like the Renaissance Zone and get them to locate where we already have existing infrastructure that's not being utilized, we lower the tax burden for everyone. And that's why I support programs like the Renaissance Zone, because it lowers the burden for everyone by getting businesses to go where our infrastructure exists.
So both of you talked about tax incentives, and we see obviously where the price of oil is at because of the supply glut that we currently are facing. I don't know what it closed at today, but it's been in that $25, $30 range for quite some time. My guesstimation from the people I talk to that are experts in the arena say, hey, this is probably going to stick in that 25. We may see 60 at some point, in 2017. Here's my point. Saudi Arabia says they're going to continue to pump oil. You've got 50 million barrels of oil sitting off the coast of Iran. They now can sell that stuff because of this Iran deal that was signed by the Obama administration. So we know oil prices are going to stay low. What do we do to obviously, 4 years ago, I think it was, we had over 200 rigs in the state. Today, it's 35. Things are going in the wrong direction. My question to you, you've both said incentives to bring people into the state. Oklahoma right now, for the first 3 years that you pump a rig down there, it's 1% tax rate, 7% after that. Would you do something like that to continue to have oil pumping here in the state of North Dakota?
Well, again, I think we'll have to look at everything. I mean, the shortfall is going to be so significant, and as Rick said, it's not just the 1.1, it's the fact that we're starting with a zero ending balance or a zero starting balance versus a large one, and the production tax and extraction tax were also flowing into a number of funds, and they're not filling up. That was money that was, a lot of that went to local subdivisions. And so we have a much more than a $1.1 billion problem, and it's going to require us taking a look at everything.
But so yes or no, would you consider lowering the oil taxes to 1%, 7%?
It's when you're competing as a state, you have to look at the competition. We're not competing in a vacuum here. And if we have the highest tax structure, as Rick said, if we have the highest tax structure, talent and capital is going to move other places.
So I'm hearing you say yes.
I'm saying it's on the table. Everything
Okay.
everything has to be on the table.
Would you lower the tax rate for the oil companies to make sure they continue to pump here?
It's definitely on the table.
Okay, let's move on to this. The Attorney General obviously is engaged in several legal battles concerning the coal industry. I just saw today, during the Obama administration from 2009, the coal industry, believe it or not, has lost 30,000 jobs across the country. If you were governor, and Mr. Becker, I'll start with you. If you were governor, would you fight this administration and the EPA to ensure that the coal industry thrives here in North Dakota?
Yeah, 100%.
If you want to go ahead, then...
Well, I'd employ every tactic possible. I would do a Saul Alinsky tactics all over the place. There's something called an anti-commandeering doctrine, right? And we would take that angle everywhere we could. The lawsuits that have been employed, we'd do that. We'd do a bait and switch. Say we're going to do a state plan. We get the 2-year extension so that we have more time. We hopefully get a Republican president. Then we can pull back. No, we don't want a state plan. There's ways to delay this and drag it out and make it miserable for the feds.
Mr. Bergen, would you fight to keep coal alive and well here in North Dakota?
Yes, and I would say, and this is probably a good point to mention, that Attorney General Stenjum, who I've known for over 40 years, he was my brother's law school roommate for the first 2 years of law school at UND. He's our longest-serving Attorney General. He knows this stuff inside and out. He's in the middle of his term. He's got 2 years left, and there is still more battles to be fought. So as I've said, I've voted for Wayne every time he's run for statewide office, and I voted for him 2 years ago, and I'd love to see him finish his term. I'd love to see him keep fighting the EPA on things like the Clean Power Plan.
One of the things as our governor, not only do you become obviously the executive of our state, but it gives you a seat on the 3-person industrial commission, which is a very, very important commission for this state. The commission itself has taken some heat as of late because they have these oil fines and they go out to the companies and go, hey, we're going to reduce the fine by 75 to 90%. If you were governor, now you're on the industrial commission, do you continue that practice or do you change it? And if so, how specifically?
I think that reducing the fines to a degree is appropriate if it's tied to a very prompt response and a complete cleanup, as well as in showing evidence for taking actions that will prevent further occurrences. 75 to 90% is far too much.
Mr. Burgum.
It's going to have to be changed. I mean, if we're going to be asking state agencies to lay off people, if we're going to be asking people to take pay cuts, if we're going to be asking law enforcement, I mean, law enforcement's already, there's some of the most dangerous jobs in the state, particularly in the western part of the state. Talk of freezing their salaries. If we're going to do that, no one is going to stand for oil companies getting big cuts on fines, because we have to find a system that achieves the objective of making sure that our environment is protected and the sites are cleaned up. And it doesn't make any political sense to put the power in 3 individuals to be deciding this, particularly when those individuals can receive contributions from the firms that they're regulating, and to have that kind of control as a body of 3 over the size of the fines. So the whole thing to me is broken and needs to be fixed.
So during this campaign, would you not take any money from oil and gas companies?
I would make a commitment that I won't take money from people that I'll be regulating.
All right. Would you do the same, Mr. Becker?
No, I'll take their money. I'm still going to do the right thing.
Let's move on to education here in the state of North Dakota. Now, you grew up in Mandan, correct? Yep. All 3 of us here are products of the K-12 education here in North Dakota. I see these stats. There was a report that came out last October. I'm embarrassed by them, but I'm not running for governor. You guys are. Let's talk about some of these stats and talk about what you specifically would do. North Dakota State Assessment was released in late October of last year. This is just so sad to me. It showed that 46% of our students were proficient in English and reading, 40% were proficient in math, and also 40% of our students that go on to college need to take remedial courses just to get caught up. Mr. Burgum, as governor, what are you going to do to ensure that more and more of our students become better in just basic reading and math?
Well, this is another topic that we have to really think about reinvention. I mean, when I've had a chance to visit some of these schools around the state, and I still have one of my 3 kids is still in high school today. The process looks a lot like the one that I went through 40 years ago, and yet, the application of technology, we have access to all the world's information. Is it being used? Most of these schools have got rules that say, the kid's walking in the door with a supercomputer called a smartphone in their pocket, and the rules are all about, shut it off, put it in your locket. If we see it, you lose it. I mean, as opposed to saying, wow, 5 years ago, people were trying to do fundraisers to get a cow, computers on wheels. We're going to wheel a few computers around to get in the classrooms. Now every kid has a smartphone. It's a platform that could be used, and we're not using it. So we have to rethink the whole problem and understand on education. I may be the first governor candidate in history who's interviewed and hired college students from all 11 state universities and our 2 private schools, because I've been in the market hiring for the last 30 years. I know the product that we're producing. And I know the people I've hired, I know the people we've passed on. And it starts back in K through 12, the education they're getting. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's not a money solution. This is not throw more money at the problem. This is throw new ideas at it. And I know we've got teachers that care, hardworking, administrators are out there that are looking for solutions. But part of it is we have to allow for more experimentation. We need some competition. We need to allow, charter schools to come into the state. So we've got some competitive alternatives, and we got to rethink about how we deliver this. But if we don't, we're never going to be able to diversify the economy, because we won't have people that have the skill sets to take advantage of the new things that are coming.
And I agree with you. I guess my question to you is, as governor specifically, give me 1 or 2 things. You said we're going to leverage some smartphones. What else would you do?
Well, I think, again, there's an opportunity here for taking a look at the new innovations that are occurring you know, at schools around the country that are out of the public environment. I mean, there are lots of good ideas around team learning and team design work and
But I
all
think
that.
the challenge is what parents wants to be their kids be the lab rats. I mean, for example, Khan Academy, if you're familiar with that, great program. They utilize the web very well, but I don't know how proven it is from a research perspective. So if I'm a parent and you say, hey, guess what, Chris, we're going to try Khan Academy on your daughter, I don't know if I want her to be a lab rat.
If you're a parent right now, you got a chance, 6 out of 10 chance that they're not going to be proficient.
That's not good
So,
either.
you know, I mean, we're this low, there's certain things that are worth taking the risk. And particularly when we've got models, we wouldn't be lab rats. We can copy what's worked. You know, there's been, you know,
That's what I'm asking. What's work that you know of that we can implement and use?
Well, take a look at the innovations that are happening at, I mean, High Tech High in California. There in terms of how they're teaching the design studio, where students themselves work on multidisciplinary problem solving, as opposed to you sit in one class for an hour, the bell rings,
Right.
you go to the next one, you sit there for an hour. You know, would any of us ride a bus for an hour in the morning and go to a place where we were told to sit in a desk, be quiet, and when the bell rings, you got 5 minutes to get to another room? I mean, no one would do that today, right? But yet we ask our kids to do it.
Mr. Becker, I want to move on to you, and I do want to throw sort of one variable in this to give you a chance to say, hey, here, Chris, this is what I would do to reform. And maybe you think it's fine, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on reforming the education system here in North Dakota. The one thing that when I look at, they're called annual yearly progress reports, and there is again, disturbing correlation between socioeconomic status and GPA and academic performance. The lower your socioeconomics, the lower, I mean, it's almost verbatim if you go look at these reports. So with that being said, what would you do to reform the education system here in North Dakota to make sure that our students are performing better?
First off, we have a progressive mindset that's systemic and permeated the entire education system and the capital when it comes to education. And we need to take a look at what can we do to break away from that and get back to what's best for our children. And one of the things I'm proposing is to get out of Common Core, get out of the Smarter Balanced Consortium. That'll allow North Dakota to develop their own standards. The second thing that would be really remarkable, 5 other states have it, there's something called an educational savings account. That allows the money that the state applies to each individual child to follow them if the parent chooses to enroll them in private school, online school, doesn't matter if it's Christian, Catholic, homeschool, any combination thereof. Then they can tailor the education for the child that they see best. When that starts happening, you'll have competition in the public school system itself. The competition is going to drive the ingenuity that it takes to give a really good quality education. You know, North Dakota is #1 for graduation rate, high school graduation rate. And yet we're below average for college-ready transcripts. We're below average for the number of students that graduate college within 6 years. We're below average in the freshman college retention rate. I mean, there's dramatic room for
So
improvement.
what does that say to you?
It says that our K-12 is broken. My daughter graduated last May at Century High School, and I don't have the exact numbers, roughly say 350 kids. There were something on the order of 15 valedictorians, something on the order of 50 highest honors, distinguished honors, meaning 3.75%. What that tells me is they're not learning. They're getting good grades, but they're not learning. And the assessments...
But where's the system failing our kids then? Is it the teachers just shuffling people through to move them up to the next grade? Is it what's happening here where our system is failing them?
The attention is directed to tests and assessments and not really actual learning. It's fully driven away from a model that I think in the 1950s would have been more appropriate now, not with technology, but understanding and developing critical thinking. Critical thinking is absent, totally absent from the schools.
All right, Mr. Bergen, before we move on, I want to say, would you keep Common Core or get rid of it in North Dakota?
I'd get rid of it. We need high standards. We need high standards. We may choose as a state that we want to have higher standards than every other state. I have no issues with high standards, but we need to have local control.
Let's move into higher ed. I do want to move on to some other topics fairly quickly here. Let's start with the basics here. I mean, we're a 700,000 person state. Is 11 state-run universities too many, and would you be a proponent of changing the Constitution so there's fewer?
I'm a proponent of changing it. Until that day comes, though, there are ample opportunities to look at cost savings. We've got presidents, vice presidents, deans galore for each of the universities. There's no reason why the smaller institutions need to have their own full slate of administrators. They can be accountable to, say, UND and NDSU as the research institutions. We can look at building, brick and mortar. That needs to stop. We need to have a moratorium on that. We need to take a look at how we can really look at online learning and increasing that. Right now, my kids in college at UND, if they are taking a full slate of credits, it's a given price. If they take a portion of those online, they're charged another $800 per course.
Wow.
So it's a disincentive to online learning, which is ridiculous. And so we're building classroom seats. And then lastly, well, not lastly, but another area is administrators. The number of administrators on the payroll has grown enormously, and yet our student population has decreased 2 to 3%. I mean, it's crazy. And then the last thing is we're sending $1 billion roughly to higher ed every biennium. Over half of the students in the higher ed system are out-of-state students. When we look at the cut rate, Kmart level cost for the out-of-state students to come, and we look at the tuition waivers for international students, we are asking our taxpayers in North Dakota not only to fund their own children to go to college, not only to fund via taxes other North Dakota children to go to college, but we're asking them to fund Minnesota and other students all across the nation and the world to come. That's a little too much to ask.
Okay, Mr. Burgum, would you be a proponent of not having the state run 11 universities in the state and changing the state constitution?
I don't think the issue is the number of campuses we have. I think it's what happens on those campuses. You know, if we were running it like a business and you said, hey, let's innovate, let's change one of these smaller campuses and try that as a way where we can change what we're delivering and how we deliver it, it could turn into the place that everybody wants to go. So I'm less worried about that. But I do agree with Rick. There are a lot of things we can do in streamlining, and we have to focus on the educational content, lower the administrative burden. The one thing where I would disagree with Rick, I guess, is on the out-of-state tuition, because I think one of the things that if we're trying to attract talent and capital in North Dakota, one of the ways you get people to come here and stay here is they come for college, they meet somebody, they stay and they live here. And we have very few ways to get people to decide to come to North Dakota. And I think that there's, if we've got a great educational value and that is a recruiting tool for young people, that's going to help us build a diversified economy.
Do you agree with that?
No, because again, it's on the taxpayer's back. One of the things that we're looking at, that we're told, is that there's a 40% retention rate for kids that come out of state to stay in state, and that drives the economy, and that's worth the taxpayer subsidizing. The problem is, I wish we could get an actual transparent number that has validity. The 40% includes all of the kids that are in graduate school, and the discrepancy between the cost at their home school for graduate school and North Dakota is that much greater. There's a tremendous amount of students that are staying for graduate school. They're gone within a year. They're not contributing to the economy, and yet they're still a burden on the taxpayers.
I'm going to get to workforce recruitment in a moment, but quickly, should land-grant universities like an NDSU or a UND, for example, should they raise their admission levels? Because you look at their statistics, 23% of the students graduate in 4 years, 50% graduate in 6 years. Is that a function of saying, hey, you got money, it's a government-backed loan, I know I'm going to get paid, your GPA might not be great, but come on in, I'll take your money, and good luck?
Well, again, I'm looking at this through a completely different lens, and there's a lot of focus on graduation rates and time to graduation, when that may or may not indicate how much the person has learned. And it would also indicate that if you graduate with a 4-year degree from one of our universities, that you've learned everything you need to learn for the rest of your life. If you look even back, change is happening more rapidly now than when I was at NDSU. But when I was at NDSU and graduated with my degree, 5 years later, I was part of a startup in an industry, PC software, that did not exist 5 years earlier. And so what we really have to do is teach people how to learn the critical thinking, all these other skills that we have, because we don't know what's coming. We do know that change is going to occur faster than ever, but we have to think about adult education, how do people be lifelong learners. I mean, the ag community today and farmers, there's more computing power on a new tractor or combine than there was on the lunar lander that we sent to the moon. And yet, the average age of our farmers today in North Dakota is approaching 60 or older. And so what are we going to do? How are we going to attract young farmers? I mean, how do we take advantage of the technology that's being provided even on the farms that already exist? So this is, again, part of our role of education is not just check the box, they have a high school degree, check the box, they have a college degree, and toss them out there. We have to think about being the best educated state in the nation.
But I guess that's my question, is, and how are you going to measure that? Because you say, hey, Chris, a graduation time doesn't necessarily measure what that person has learned, but you also said when you ran a company, the way you were measured was based on earnings. How are you going to measure what I've learned and if I'm prepared to go out there or not?
Well, I think measurement and assessment is one of the things that's going to be, challenging in the environment. But I think again, we have to think about it completely differently than we have, and maybe we're going to innovate entire new ways to think about assessing.
All right, let's move on to workforce recruitment. I want to share this with you. Last week, the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber had their Economic Outlook event. This is pretty amazing. They said for the past 4 years, the number one factor expected to adversely impact business is difficulty attracting and retaining qualified employees. Mr. Becker, as governor, what will you do to solve this workforce recruitment issue?
Well, I'm going to do very little because it's up to business to take care of that. And when there is shortages, salaries go up, and then the demand for those high salary jobs goes up. It takes care of itself. It's like any free market situation with supply and demand curves.
But so you think North Dakota is just going to, if I'm a, let's say, engineer in Denver, you think North Dakota is just going to sell itself and you don't have to do anything to try to attract me here? Or
If
that's the company's job? Or?
Well, we go back to principles. What is it that I should do as governor to attract a student here because we need an engineer? The business needs the engineer, right? And if they are short on engineers, they're going to increase the salary. They're going to increase the benefits. They're going to toss in, a home with a white picket fence if necessary. So this is a role. It's very tempting. I see it in the legislature all the time. We're short something, we need something, there's this crisis, we need to intervene. Let's come up with this program. Do you know that someone from the Economic Development Foundation said to me in a committee, we've done a lot of things and programs that just haven't worked. And it's really easy to do that when it's not your money. It's the people of the state's money. They don't want us doing all these schemes to try and get quick, easy fixes. The free market takes care of it equally fast, but without the unintended consequences.
Mr. Burgum, I want to move on to you. I'm going to give you a chance to respond to workforce recruitment in a moment, but I'm going to do it in a different context with you initially. Back when we were looking at the SB 2279 bill, the non-discrimination bill based on sexual orientation, you and other business leaders said, hey, we need to pass this bill to have non-discrimination to help attract talent. If we can bring this graphic up, Christy, I'm going to share with you specifically what you said on a local radio show. If we had this, you said, look at the 18 to 35-year-old demographic who strongly support this, referring obviously to SB 2279. It's a signal to the entire group that we are not a welcoming state. We are in unusual territory. We've got 23,000 jobs available in North Dakota right now, and we need to be thinking really hard about what signal we are sending to the rest of the country, whether or not we are going to welcome people to move to North Dakota or whether or not we want people to move out of North Dakota. This was in probably the end of March of 2015. When you announced for governor, you said, hey, look, I'm a very data-driven person, not an ideological person. So I want to share some data with you and give you a chance to respond. Minnesota back in 1993, first state in the nation to create a law that didn't allow people to discriminate based on sexual orientation. Also in Minnesota, 2013, they passed same-sex marriage or marriage equality. Here's the actual data according to the U.S. Census Bureau. If we can bring this up for population growth from 2010 to 2014. Cass County, North Dakota, which you're saying, hey, we're not as welcoming if we don't pass these laws, has grown at 11.5%, where Clay County, Minnesota, grew at only 3.9%. North Dakota, as you saw, now the fourth youngest state in the nation. Just 4 years ago, we were 20th, I believe. So my question to you is are we more welcoming than you're giving us credit for?
Well, I think one of the things that was driving the population growth was the prosperity that we were seeing, due to high oil prices, high commodity prices, and we had a tax climate that's better than Minnesota. So I'll take any set of data if you want to match us up against Minnesota anytime. Except right now where we've got budget deficits and their economy is doing better than ours right now. But historically, that was an advantage during the data set that you're using. We had an advantage because our economy was going better. But I think the Supreme Court took care of some of this. This is not an issue that I'm driving to the forefront of my campaign. I'm running because on the economy. But again, as someone who spent time hiring and managing people and being in the workforce, I've done workforce recruiting for 35 years. I know it's a factor. I know it's a factor because.
But the data doesn't present that.
Well, I've got my own personal experience. Because again, I've interviewed thousands of people. I understand how important this issue is to people, and there's a majority of young people that would support marriage equality. Now it's the law of the land. And so again, we don't have to worry about it. When I made the comments before, which I stand behind, we were in danger of being an island where we were the only state that was saying that we were against it when everybody else around us was for us. But now that it's a level playing field, it's less of an issue.
But what I'm saying is that Minnesota hasn't grown as rapid of a rate as we have. And again, if you look at the most recent data from the Census Bureau,
check Minnesota's economic data now and see who's winning today.
But one of your caveats to this was the 18 to 35-year-old demo, they get it. Our state has gone to the fourth youngest state in the nation, average about 34.9 years of age, where just 4 years ago we were 24. So clearly younger people are moving here, yet we didn't pass any of these bills.
Right, because we had jobs, but there was people that would have moved here that didn't. And that's the piece that's not showing up in your data.
All right. I know that you voted for SB 2279. Why specifically?
One of the overarching aspects to good governance is that everyone's treated equally under the law. A lot of people felt that 2279 carved out a special class for gay people. The way I read the law, it didn't do that. If it had done it, I would have voted no. What it did is it included the class, included gay people within the 1964 framework of the civil rights legislation.
But so my question is, what you're saying almost presupposes that North Dakotans are not treating homosexuals fairly.
No, it doesn't actually presuppose that. What it says is that according to the law, we are allowed to treat them differently. I'm not suggesting that we are treating them differently. The reason it was a...
So is it a solution looking for a problem, or?
I don't know that it's really a problem. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a solution looking for a problem, but I had to break it down into really just basic political philosophy, and that is, as whether I like it or not, there are many groups within the groups of people that I cannot refuse to do business with, lease private property to. Now, I might have a problem with that, but that's the way it is. There's one group of people that was outside of all those other groups. Bringing them into the fray, I thought, at least, despite the fact that it still infringed upon my personal rights to refuse someone, it at least took care of the problem of not treating everyone equally under the law.
And I agree. I don't want to see anybody discriminated against either. I'm glad that you admitted, hey, Chris, maybe it's a, solution looking for a problem that's really not there in the state of North Dakota. Do you think it's a problem in North Dakota?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Let me share with you what this gentleman said. Representative.
Anybody that thinks it's not must not know someone who's got a family member, a brother, a sister, a cousin, someone who's had to live with the idea that they could be discriminated against.
But I'm saying, do you think North Dakotans are discriminating based on sexual orientation?
If we have a state that wants to be tolerant and accepting of all individuals, that's the kind of state that I want to live in. Let's just start there.
But I'm asking, do you think that's a problem right now in North Dakota?
I think that it's an issue if we continue to even have this discussion, because if we keep having this discussion, we're trying to slice little bits of precision, and we sound like a bunch of people in the 1960s trying to justify why we didn't have civil rights. Just having the discussion sends a signal to people that we're not.
Let's back up. I mean, you look at the
tolerant.
1960s, and you can see very clearly there's different drinking fountains for African Americans versus white people. There's different places for them to sit. I don't walk into a restaurant right now and go, hey, this is where homosexuals sit and this is where heterosexuals sit. So I don't think as pervasive, as you will, at least in your face. And you're saying that it's a problem. And I want to share with you, Representative Robin Weiss from Hurtsville. He was on the House Human Services Committee. He actually carried the bill to the floor, and he said he listened to a lot of testimony of a quote-unquote perceived idea that discrimination is rampant in North Dakota, but not received any testimony that showed any outright discrimination going on. If we're going to add this as a protected class, we need to be sure that we're solving a problem. You say to him what?
This to me is kind of amazing, because we're still in a culture where we have people in this state who are part of the GLBT community that don't even want to say they are, because they're afraid of how they'll be treated if they acknowledge they are. So did he hold a hearing and say, everybody come in and tell us about your problems, and then the room was packed with people, or did a bunch of people stay home because they're afraid to even acknowledge the existence is? And so I think we solve this problem by just removing the potential to discriminate against people. If we want to, again, it's about respect, it's about tolerance. Let's just go there and then move on and fix the problems. I mean, fix that one so we can go address the real issues, which is
so I'm hearing you say that, yeah, it is a problem that needs to be fixed, just to be clear.
Anybody that thinks it isn't must not know anybody in that community.
All right, let's move on to this, and this kind of ties together. back in March, this is actually about the same time you made these comments, Apple CEO Tim Cook, he wrote an op-ed when Indiana was passing the religious freedom laws for the state. And the title of his op-ed said, "Pro-discrimination, religious freedom laws are dangerous." Do you agree with Mr. Cook that religious freedom laws are dangerous?
No.
No.
Okay, so if let's say
Let's say our country was founded on the idea of freedom of religion. I mean, it's a First Amendment right. And of course, as we go forward as a country, you can run into a collision sometimes between freedom of religion and individual rights, which is what you run into, that collision. But we have to start with the idea that we're a unique place on the planet because we allow freedom of religion. When I was at Microsoft, I had people working for me in 120 countries. I didn't know, but I couldn't even have counted the number of religions that were represented across that. And people around the world want to be part of the United States because we're a place that allows, by law, freedom of religion. There's so many countries where there's the discrimination around religion is built into the whole way the country's operated. I think we forget how unique and how wonderful we are, and this is a core principle of who we are as a country.
So here's my question, because obviously this created a huge kerfuffle, if you will, across the country when, and this was a setup, by the way, but the reporter walks into a pizza shop, asks them if they will host their same-sex wedding or whatnot, or make sure they have the food there of pizzas. This Christian pizza shop said, "No, we do not want to cater a same-sex wedding. We have no problem serving gays inside here. We just don't want to cater a same-sex wedding." Obviously, people were not happy with that. For you, if this came up, how do you solve it? I mean, do you stand with the pizza shop and say, "Hey, you've got that right to not obviously do this with a same-sex wedding," or not?
Well, as we move forward as a country, these are the kind of legal cases that'll be tested, in the courts and all the way up to the Supreme Court.
I know, but I'm asking Doug Burgum, in his heart, where do you stand?
Well, I think that it's, again, this is a balance. You've got to have, as a business owner, you have the ability to design your business plan and decide who and when you want to serve. But if that same pizza owner said, I'm not doing your wedding because you're African American, our law would say that would be absolutely, I mean, that person would be vilified for their racism if they did that. And yet somehow we're still having the same argument today, 50 years after civil rights, and thinking that it's different. I don't see how it's different.
But according to their biblical beliefs, it is different.
Some people's biblical beliefs didn't believe in interracial marriage.
I understand. That's why I'm asking you today.
If you have a biblical belief that says you don't believe in interracial marriage, then you shouldn't be able to, serve them pizza.
Well, that's what I'm asking you. As governor, do you think, hey, you know what, I'm going to make this business serve the same-sex couple, or would you stand with the same-sex couple?
I'm not going to make anybody do anything. I'm just saying this is an issue that should be continued to be resolved in the courts.
We will ask that another way. For you, do you stand with the pizza shop owner or the same-sex couple?
The pizza shop owner. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act of '93, I believe it was, applied to federal government. And what the states are doing is simply imposing that same level from the federal government down to the states, because it was struck down by, I think, the Supreme Court. It didn't apply to the states. It goes back to the notion that government can't regulate morality. They can't make me think well of another person if I'm not going to. If I have a private business, frankly, I really should be able to serve whomever I like for any reason I like, and refuse service to anyone I choose to refuse service to.
Excuse me, sir, but you signed off on SB 2279 that wouldn't allow people do that for housing. So now you're saying that any business should be able to, except unless you're a realtor.
Exactly.
But that's not congruent.
Well, it is somewhat congruent because, again, I referenced the law of the land. The law of the land is within 64 civil rights legislation. We have all of these groups in effect. Okay, I think that should be on a state-by-state basis. It's a states' rights issue. It's not. I don't have control of that. So rather than exclude one group from protection, I will include all groups. Okay. Then we move on to the religious freedom restoration. Now we're talking about people. At least we can separate out a specific type of occurrences when it's based on religion that we can say, and it's not just for homosexuals. If someone has a problem with any group of people because of what their religion teaches them, it alleviates their concern where they don't have to do service. So that's the consistency between those two positions.
All right, you said you stand with the pizza shop owner. Mr. Burgum, I want to move on to you. A lot of people obviously are asking you about where you're at with the pro-life, pro-choice situation. When you were on our show back on January 21st, you said neither. I said, Chris, the research I've done is that we really want to prevent unwanted pregnancies. I think what people want, what I'm hearing at least on the streets, is people want to know in Doug Burgum's heart, where are you at? So if you had to make a decision today, in Doug Burgum's heart, are you pro-life or pro-choice?
Well, in Doug Burgum's heart, I care about the women who find themselves in this unfortunate situation. And I think, again, this is same as I said last time on the show, the labels that exist on, there's two choices, one end or the other, are not helping solve the real problem. And if we can come to think that even preventing one unplanned pregnancy is a victory, then that's something, a common ground that both sides could get to. And whether it's better education, better services and support through abortion planning, but really coming together as a community and a state to support women who find themselves in this often helpless and scary situation. If we can do that, then I think we're going to be, then we're moving ourselves forward. Because I don't see any way that the two sides are going to agree on this. Right. It's going to be decided by the Supreme Court. And as a problem solver, I want to work on something that I can fix.
I think people just want to know, hey, where is this man's heart at? So what I'm hearing you say, just for clarity, so I don't misrepresent, is I'm hearing you say, hey, Chris, I'm pro-choice. The question I have for you is at what point? Is it at viability? Is it late-term choice? Where are you at in that spectrum?
I didn't say that. You're putting a label on me.
You said that you want to respect the. Okay, I'm saying that you are saying, hey, Chris, it's okay for women to make that decision if they choose to do that.
I didn't say that. I said we have too many unplanned pregnancies.
But you said in your heart, I'm with the women that have to make that choice or that decision.
Yeah, well, yes, and so then how do we support them through, when they find themselves in that position, then how do we best support those people?
So how would you do that? Would you say, hey, go put them up for adoption, or would you say make the decision to terminate the pregnancy, or?
Well, I think, again, we have to go upstream on this one. We have to figure out a way to try to have fewer unplanned pregnancies in the first place, because that's the only thing these two sides can agree on.
All right, let's move on. Anything else you want to add to that, sir?
No.
I think people know where you're at, Rick. But
well, there's one thing I want to add. I think this issue is way too important for one person to decide.
But I'm not asking you to decide.
It's too important for one elected leader, one politician. As governor, which people want to know what I would do as governor, they can know as governor, I would do everything in my power to make sure that this issue went to a statewide ballot. Because this is where it has to be decided. This is so personal and so passionate, and it's a combination of all kinds of moral and religious beliefs that are tied into it, and that's why the energy is so high around this thing. This thing has to be brought to the people. That's where this decision has to be decided, and I would make sure that the people got a chance to vote on this.
Any comments, Mr. Becker?
Nope, not if you don't have a question for me.
Well, I think what I understand is you're pro-life. Is that accurate, or?
Yep.
Okay.
It goes. I'll say real briefly. It goes back to the foundational principles. The sole purpose for the existence of government is to protect our natural God-given rights. The right to life, liberty, property, in that order. So the government cannot take the risk of taking someone's life from them at the expense or in favor of temporarily preserving someone's liberty. So right. That's my position.
Thank you. We just got a few more topics we want to get to here. This is one that came up in South Dakota. You guys have talked a lot about, hey, we got to be understanding what's coming down the pipeline for us. Recently, South Dakota had what's called the Student Privacy Act, passed the House and the Senate, has to deal with transgender students saying, hey, we want you to use a bathroom and or a locker room that corresponds with your biological sex. If you are transgender, we can obviously make special accommodations for you. Governor Dugard vetoed this bill. I think it was just yesterday, as a matter of fact. Mr. Becker, for you, if a similar bill came to you as governor, would you sign that bill into law or veto it?
I would need a little more detail.
So are we looking at? So here, if you're born as a male but you identify as a woman, the bill is saying, hey, you've got to go use the bathroom and the locker room that identifies with your biological sex. Unless you get documentation that shows you're a transgender, then we will make special accommodations for you and put you in a unisex or a solo bathroom and or a locker room.
I would support that.
Okay.
Well, I would concur with Republican Governor Dugard, who vetoed it, and he vetoed it under the principle that this was state overreach, trying to have the state of South Dakota come up with a rule for every high school and elementary school, whatever, in the state of South Dakota, and he just said, let them decide locally what they want to do. And again, this is a situation that I think local people can decide.
And part of what he's saying as well is there's obviously some legal battles that are taking place via Title IX, saying, hey, we don't want to spend the money on that. I guess my question ultimately then for you would be, are you comfortable? Because the big question I've got, Doug, from feedback is, look, I just don't want someone who identifies as woman going into my young daughter's locker room, taking a shower, even though they're male. I mean, are you comfortable with that?
Listen, in any high school in the state, if a guy walked into a girl's locker room, I'm pretty sure the administrators, the teachers, the students themselves would have something to say about it, and they would come up with a set of rules to try to resolve that.
All right, let's move on to corporate farming. That's going to be on the ballot coming up in June. Obviously, we're making corporate farming exemptions for swine and dairy. Good thing or a bad thing for the state of North Dakota?
The further we can get away from the anti-corporate farming laws, the better off we are. The whole purpose there is from the Depression in the 30s, when we had a tremendous amount of farms being foreclosed upon, and that was a way to try and prevent the banks from taking over and owning all the farms. We're well beyond that. Having these restrictions on corporations, it really, in essence, takes away competition, takes away people's rights. If I have a farm and I have a good opportunity to sell it to an entity that happens to be a corporation, the state's not going to allow me to sell my farm to that's a little crazy to me. So the further we can get away from anti-corporate, the better off we'll be.
Mr. Burgum, do you support the corporate farming exemptions for dairy and swine, one? And two is, with that being said, I don't know if it falls underneath this umbrella, but do you support the pig farm being proposed near Buffalo, North Dakota?
Well, let's take the general and the specific. From a general case, and of course, you know, I grew up in Arthur, families in the grain elevator business, so I grew up, you know, working on the family farmland and working at the elevator, and have spent, you know, a big chunk of my life, you know, either directly or now through the board of directors that are involved with agriculture. And one of the things, if you look at ag statistics for the state, we're trailing all the states around us in terms of where we are in livestock production. I mean, like way behind South Dakota and Minnesota. And part of that is the rules that prevent the capital aggregation that you need to have capital come in to support these operations. And if we want to have a more diverse economy, that includes being more diverse within agriculture, which means we need to build up our livestock industry here as well. So in the general case, I would say I would support it. In the specific case, this, you know, comes down to, you know, zoning. And, you know, in a city, if somebody, you know, said, hey, we're going to put a sewer treatment plant, you know, right behind your house, the people that live there get to say, hey, we want to have a decision. This is, you know, we want to decide whether this is here. If someone's putting an industrial, you know, industrial plant in the middle of a residential zone, there would be a discussion. So I think it's appropriate that the neighbors and residents in that area, you know, have something to say about the siting and the location, because they do. I mean, as part of, you know, private property rights, they should be able to, you know, have something to say.
All right, let's move on.
I was just going to say, it's interesting to note that, yeah, South Dakota is doing better than us in dairy, for instance, and the reason for that is because they got rid of their anti-corporate farming laws a long time ago.
Yes.
So we have people moving and conducting their business south of the border.
Gentlemen, we got a few more minutes left and a couple more important topics that I'd like to get to, and one of them is these. I know you guys are both well aware of the loss of Officer Jason Mosier and Marcus Schumacher in our community. I mean, tremendous wound for this community. One of the laws in North Dakota allows a convicted felon to get his gun rights back after 10 years. Are you a proponent of that, or does that need to be changed, and should convicted felons not be able to get their gun rights back in the state of North Dakota?
The law should be changed, and it's a tragedy that he was able to get a hold of one. And of course, this is you know, it's a tragedy that we lost an officer for the first time in, you know, over 130 years. But again, it's not something I ever expected in my lifetime. I was living on a farm outside of Fargo till a year and a half ago and moved into downtown. I was with my 17-year-old son that night, and we saw in the news reports that they were doing the lockdown in downtown. We opened up the window, and we actually could hear the shots being fired from where we were living, because we live only about 6 blocks from where this happened. You know, and that's a chilling thing to have to go through that, and then to find out later that an officer was actually killed. I mean, I'm sure that's something I'll remember the rest of my life. My son will remember the rest of his life. But it's not an isolated thing. I was talking to a young woman who's 1 year into her police officer duty in a city out in the oil patch. She's been assaulted 4 times in her first year, physically assaulted 4 times in the first year. I mean, she had to draw a gun but didn't shoot. She's been shot at. You know, there's you know, and a lot of these were, you know, substance abuse related incidents, but, you know, we really need to focus on protecting our law enforcement officers in this state and do everything to make their job safe, because now with the economy turning down, it's not like, you know, crime could go up, when the economy turns down. It
Right.
often does, and drug use can go up. And so we've got a whole set of things that we are going to have to face when prosperity has left us, but some of the dark side of prosperity remains with all the social issues around crime and drugs that we're going to have to face as a state.
Mr. Becker, I'm going to give you a chance, but since he brought it up, I do want to have you touch on this. Over the last, and I believe it's 18 months, Mr. Berg, and I've got the numbers here if I can find them for you. Yeah, roughly 18 months. According to the North Dakota Department of Human Services, we've seen an increase of over 1,000% of heroin addiction in our state. What do you do to solve that problem?
Well, again, this starts with education, outreach, law enforcement. I mean, this is a community-wide effort that has to try to resolve this, because again, when things that are and we have to take a look at who's selling it. I mean, are they we have gangs moving in here because they saw that there was money, a lot of money that was flowing, and so where there's money flowing, then drugs follow and gangs follow. So it's going to be, as in most cases in other states that have solved this, it's with a cross-community drug task force initiatives that involves all ranges of social services, human services, law enforcement, education, starting at a very early age for people to understand the problem, identify it, and work as a community to solve it. But these are tough, intractable problems.
I agree. We'll get to that in a moment. Just to be clear, you're saying, hey, convicted felon, never get his gun rights back again.
Never.
Representative Becker, do you agree with that?
I disagree wholeheartedly.
Let's hear your where you're at with it.
You're given a sentence, you do your time. We believe in redemption. We believe in people regaining the rights. If one holds the position that if you make a law which prevents a felon from having a gun, a criminal from having a gun, that they won't have a gun, I mean, that negates the whole concept of anti-gun laws. We know that criminals don't obey laws. So nothing in the world is to say that that person wouldn't have had a gun anyway if there was such a law. But there would have been thousands of other people who had paid their time and are back and being productive citizens that they wouldn't have been able to enjoy the ability
So
to own
Mr.
a weapon.
Schumacher was convicted of negligent homicide, actually shot at 2 people, 1 dead, 1 wounded, served only, I think it was, he got 5 years, served only 4 because of good behavior. So what you're saying is after he served those 4 years, he should be able to walk out and get his gun rights restored?
No, because the law says 10 years.
Okay, so you're saying the law is fine as it is at 10 years?
Yes.
All right, thank you. You brought up some drug task force situations, Mr. Burgum. Mr. Becker, I'm going to start with you on this one. Many of us as well, another sad story in our state, Andrew Sadek. Became a confidential informant, went missing on May 1st of 2014, was found June 27th dead on 2014. I'm sure many of you guys have seen the tape with Jason Weber, the whole interrogation thing, whatever. Here's my question, Mr. Becker. Should confidential informant laws in North Dakota be changed, number one? And number two, under your administration, are you going to hold SEMCA to have more accountability to the people of North Dakota? Because right now our Attorney General says that SEMCA is not even in his purview, and he's the state's top cop, which I don't understand, so maybe you can fill me in.
Well, I've been in contact with Andrew's mom and also the lawyer that they're working with for coming up with legislation. And so, yes, not only would I support it, I'm going to be submitting it. And so we're looking at confidential informant reform laws, where they are expressly given a full accounting of what the rights are, of what the risks are, of what's expected of them. And that's not in existence right now. So we clearly need a reform law, and that'll be in place. The other thing that this segues into is marijuana. The concept that even the possibility that Andrew could have served 40 years in prison for dealing with $80 worth of marijuana is ludicrous. And that's what was used to coerce him into the confidential informant program. We need to take a look at decriminalizing marijuana, frankly. We have a prison population which is burgeoning. The DOCR, the Department of Corrections, their budget increased by 34% over 4 years. 38% of the prison population is in because of drugs and alcohol, and a much, much higher percent in county jails. If we decriminalize it, because really sending them to prison, sending people who smoke dope to prison isn't helping them. It's really not helping anybody. It's a waste of our resources.
Gentlemen, I hate to do this. We have 5 minutes left. I want to ask you about, obviously, the confidential informants and SEMCA, and give you kind of both a final closing argument, if you will. But your thoughts on, should those laws for confidential informants be changed in North Dakota? And I think the other important thing I want to hear from one or both of you is, again, Attorney General Wayne Stenjum says that SEMCA is not underneath his purview as our Attorney General, which I don't understand, but do they need to have more accountability, meaning SEMCA, to the people of North Dakota?
Well, let me just start out by saying I'm happy to hear that Rick's going to be introducing legislation to try to change the confidential informant law, because it's a tragedy that we lose a young person over this, small of an incident. And it is, again, it makes no sense to me that we would do that. And I do think that there has to be accountability, and I think that hopefully this case won't die. Hopefully this will become out of this perhaps senseless death, there'll be some change that will, save future lives of future people that have found themselves in the same situation.
All right, thank you very much. All right, let's give you guys a chance here for closing statements. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. So let's take you out into the future. Mr. Becker, we'll start with you. You're elected governor. You serve 1 term, maybe 2 terms here in the States. Let's go out 8 years. We wrap up your term and/or terms. The 3 greatest accomplishments that the people of North Dakota are going to say about your administration are what?
We've entirely changed the way we do education, number 1. We have shrunk the size of our government down dramatically, number 2. And I guess I would say we finally came to a consensus and an answer with true property tax reform, number 3.
Wow, what would that be?
Well, for one thing, it wouldn't be the buy down that we've been doing. It would be valuation increase caps. Number 1, that's huge. That's why people's property taxes are going up. The cities and counties aren't having to sort of admit to the people that we're raising taxes because the mills aren't going up, or the percentage is not going up, but the valuation increases are dramatic. That's one. Another area is you can have actual overt tax increase caps. Until when you cross that threshold, it has to be taken to the vote of the people. Those are 2 things right there that will cause a dramatic shift in how we're looking at property taxes.
Mr. Burgum, you are governor of the executive of North Dakota. We go out 4 years, 8 years. The 3 greatest accomplishments from your administration, the people of North Dakota will say what?
Well, I think we have to reduce the size of state government. That's number 1. We have to increase local control. That's number 2. If we increase local control and reduce the size of state government, then we have an opportunity to build better, stronger, and more vibrant communities. And because in addition to having a diversified economy, which is something I'll be working on, if we want people to live here, they have to have places that they want to live. And when you're talking about the number 1 issue that came up even from the chamber was workforce development. When I was graduating from college, if somebody got a job at IBM, you'd say, congratulations, where are you going to work? And they'd say, I don't know yet, because IBM is going to tell me where I'm going to work, like it was the Army. But today, the young people today coming out of school and looking for a career, they pick the city they want to live in first, then they find a job. And so if we can create all the jobs we want in North Dakota, but if we don't have places where people want to live, we're not going to be able to attract them. And the same thing for there's so much wealth in the baby boomers, and as they're retiring, and if every successful North Dakota person, turns 55 or 60, retires, and then leaves for Arizona, then all the capital goes with them. They leave their small house here, buy a big house in some other state. We have to make it attractive for people who've had their lives here, have their capital to keep reinvesting in North Dakota. So we need a diversified economy, we need a smaller state government, we need more local control, and we need great cities is what we need for us to be to really be exceptional. And again, I don't want to piggyback off of Rick, but if we don't have a great education system, we're not going to be competitive in a world.
There's a lot of challenges
in a world. We are, but the thing that's exciting about in some ways about the fiscal crisis we're facing, the fiscal crisis will actually drive people to look for new solutions beyond the traditional belt tightening. We'll have to actually think about reinvention, because we will not be able to get where we need to go by just trimming on the edges. We're going to have to rethink how we deliver the services.
To both of you, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I hope you had as much fun as I did, because I consider to continue to talk to you for quite some time. Thank you. We obviously miss